In general, constellation figures, one finds in the Egyptian zodiacs, resemble the pictures of the very same constellations in old European astronomical tractates to a large extent. All of the 12 zodiacal constellations in their ancient Egyptian rendition can usually be recognized without much effort. Nevertheless, Egyptian zodiacs possess some distinctive characteristics of the constellation figures that are not found in European drawings, and they haven't apparently been noticed up to now. However, they are important for the general interpretation of the zodiacs. We are referring to the fact that the constellation figures in Egyptian zodiacs would often be united with the planetary figures, forming a complex astronomical hieroglyph of sorts. This will be discussed in more detail later. For now, only the constellation symbols as such are being considered. Let us begin with the Aries constellation. Here one sees the drawings of this constellation taken from various Egyptian zodiacs, and one from the European star chart by Dürer. It is presumed that Dürer drew the chart in 1515. One sees perfectly well that all of these ancient Egyptian drawings of the Aries are drawn in the exact same manner as Albrecht Dürer's drawing, notwithstanding the fact that in Scaligerine chronology they are separated by a monstrous gap of 1500 years. Once we correct it, everything becomes clear. It turns out that the Egyptian zodiacs weren't created in deep antiquity, but rather in the Middle Ages. According to the new chronology reconstruction, the development of astronomy in Egypt and Europe took place around the same time, in the atmosphere of constant interaction between various parts of the Great Empire. It was only after the decline and dissolution of the Great Empire that the ties between Egypt and Europe got severed for some 200 years, which only changed after the advent of the Napoleonic troops in the late 18th, early 19th century. The constellation that follows Aries on the ecliptic is the Taurus. We see drawings of the Taurus constellation taken from Egyptian zodiacs and the medieval star chart by Dürer. In each case, the Egyptian drawings are very explicit about the fact that the figure in question stands for Taurus. Every Egyptian drawing of Taurus has got the same shape of horns. They all look like crescents, whereas the horns of Aries have an undulating shape. Horned figures are often seen in Egyptian zodiacs. It is most likely that the shape of their horns carried a definite meaning. 3 types of horns are encountered in Egyptian zodiacs: undulating, as in the case of Aries; crescent-shaped, as with Taurus; and omega-shaped, with the tips facing outward. Egyptian artists would usually draw Saturn and Jupiter with horns. Saturn would usually have crescent-shaped horns, like Taurus, whereas Jupiter's horns are undulated, like those of Aries. The next constellation is that of Gemini. This is the drawings of the constellation as seen in the Egyptian zodiacs and on Dürer's star chart. Here, one can also see the photograph of the Gemini drawing from the long zodiac of Dendera. Dürer depicts Gemini as 2 naked infant figures embracing each other. Their drawings on the zodiacs of Petasiris are very similar. We see the arms of the infant figures crossed as if they were embracing each other, the same as in Dürer's drawing. In all other zodiacs, excluding Brugsch, Gemini are presented as a male-female couple either holding hands or keeping their arms crossed. Let us make the following remark in distinguishing between male and female figures. They are easy to tell apart in the Egyptian zodiacs since the width of steps is always smaller in case of female figures. This allows us to distinguish between them with enough certainty even when the drawings look too abstract or happen to be in a bad condition. The sex of one figure or another may be very important for the decipherment of their astronomical meaning. Pay attention to the fact that in both of the Esna zodiacs the couple depicting Gemini is accompanied by another male figure, one that holds a long stick in both hands. The stick is not a planetary staff, since the staves held by planetary figures have rather characteristic toppings, which isn't the case with the stick in question. We see a small lamb run in front of the figure that holds the stick. We lump this figure together with the Gemini sign, although it may possibly be another symbol of the summer solstice as mentioned above. Let us now explain why in many of the Egyptian zodiacs one of the Gemini figures is male and the other female. Rather often, in 3 cases out of 9, the head of the female figure is topped by a circle, sometimes also a snake, whereas on the head of the male figure we see a feather. We shall jump ahead and explain the meaning of these symbols. This is a secondary summer solstice horoscope united with the constellation of Gemini. What we see in Gemini is the Sun and the 2 planets which are the closest thereto, Venus and Mercury. The secondary symbols for the Sun, Venus and Mercury are presented as a single astronomical hieroglyph that also depicts the constellation of Gemini. The actual Gemini figure here is nothing but a pair of figures holding hands. The feather on the head of one of the figures represents Mercury. The figure of the Gemini with a feather is always male, which corresponds to the male gender of Mercury, whereas the other figure stands for Venus, whose gender is female. The symbolism of Venus in Gemini is emphasized even more in the long zodiac of Dendera. She is drawn with a leonine head, which is a sign for Venus in the Egyptian zodiacs, as will be demonstrated later. Finally, the Sun is represented by the circle on the head of Venus in Gemini. What we have in front of us is a secondary horoscope of summer solstice in Gemini. In the present case it only includes Venus and Mercury. Other planets which were accidentally close to the Sun around the summer solstice could be represented specifically, yet not included in the astronomical hieroglyph of Gemini. Let us just bear in mind that the couple of a man with a feather on his head and a woman with a circle on hers stands for the constellation of Gemini. This will greatly aid us later on, when we begin deciphering the lesser zodiac of Esna, one of the most complex zodiacs. Now let us consider the sign of Gemini as seen in Brooks' zodiac. Here we see the sign of Gemini drawn as 2 male figures holding hands. The concept is virtually the same as in Dürer's drawing, the only difference being that both figures are clothed and not naked in this case. However, there are no naked figures in Brooks' zodiac whatsoever. Even Newt is wearing a tunic. This makes the zodiac of Brooks somewhat different from all the other ancient Egyptian zodiacs where one usually encounters naked figures. This could result from the fact that Brooks' zodiac is more recent than all the other ancient Egyptian zodiacs. The astronomical dating of Brooks' zodiac demonstrates that it was drawn as recently as in the 19th century. It appears that by that time there weren't any naked figures left in the ancient Egyptian funereal zodiacs. Dürer, on the other hand, drew his constellation of Gemini a great deal earlier, in the 16th–17th century. Here are different representations of the constellation of Cancer. One sees that Dürer's rendition is a lot more realistic than that of the Egyptian artists, who made the figure resemble a bug or a crab with a pair of human hands instead of claws, or something along those lines. By the way, the sign of Cancer isn't part of the constellation Rho in the Dendera zodiacs. For instance, in the round zodiac of Dendera, all of the constellations form a circle, whereas Cancer is located sidewise, closer to the middle of the drawing. One might think that the Egyptian artists simply made a wrong estimation about the amount of space available. However, this doesn't appear to be the case, since in the long zodiac of Dendera, the sign of Cancer is outside of the zodiacal constellation sequence, and even more explicitly so. The reason for Cancer being drawn in this odd manner on the zodiacs of Dendera remains unknown to the authors of this investigation. Emphasizing Cancer this way is unique to the Dendera zodiacs and doesn't appear in other Egyptian zodiacs. Here is how Leo appears in Egyptian zodiacs and in Dürer's star atlas. Leo is easy to recognize on almost all of the Egyptian zodiacs. Leo, as drawn by the Egyptian artist, has two distinctive characteristics that one has to bear in mind. Firstly, Egyptian artists would often draw a female figure as a part of the constellation. The woman usually rides on Leo's tail or holds onto it. This figure is usually drawn on the side of Virgo, the neighboring constellation, and so one could initially confuse it for Virgo. However, this isn't the case with most of the Egyptian zodiacs, where the constellation of Virgo is explicitly drawn separately, as a woman holding an ear of wheat. It is only in the upper zodiac of Athribis that the figure holding Leo's tail is that of Virgo, the tail also being the ear of wheat in her hand. However, in the other zodiacs, the female figure near Leo's tail does nevertheless appear to be related to the constellation of Virgo in some way. The matter is that in the Egyptian zodiacs the respective figures of Leo and Virgo are drawn in their natural position, standing on the ecliptic line in the exact same way as they do on Earth. Therefore, Leo occupies a great deal more place on the ecliptic than Virgo. Leo stands on four paws, with its body stretched horizontally parallel to the ecliptic. Whereas Virgo stands on 2 feet and occupies a relatively small amount of space. However, if we are to turn to the real position on the star chart, we shall witness the exact opposite of this picture. Virgo occupies a great deal more space on the ecliptic than Leo, being the longest of all 12 ecliptic constellations. The Sun stays in Virgo for a whole 45 days, whereas it spends only 38 in Leo. This is also a large number on the average, yet it is smaller than in the case of Virgo. This is why Dürer depicts Virgo as laying on the ecliptic and not standing on it. Egyptian artists appear to have found another way out of this predicament, drawing Virgo standing in the natural manner. The rest of Virgo would be taken up by Leo, since a quadruped animal would be a lot easier to stretch horizontally. However, the artists would draw an additional female figure near it, in order to emphasize that Leo wasn't really Leo, but rather Virgo from this side. The second distinctive characteristic of Leo as depicted on the Egyptian zodiacs, is that in nearly every Egyptian drawing, Leo appears to be standing upon a convoluted serpent figure, or has something resembling a crocodile under its paws. As will be explained later, a foreign object under a figure would normally mean that the figure was misplaced in a way, or removed from the position it would occupy, had there been nothing under its feet. This method was often used in Egyptian zodiacs and allowed the Egyptian artists to draw astronomical events which didn't pertain to the main date of the zodiac, or shifted in time, in a way. They could also use it for shifting one symbol or the other on the drawing if its rightful place was cluttered up too much. Such shifting base objects would most often be boats or snakes. The same technique is used here. The snake under the paws of Leo refers to the fact that the latter is shifted sideways from its customary place, occupying the space related to the neighboring constellation of Virgo. Or, alternatively, the shift of Virgo's double towards the figure of Leo means that the part of Leo in question really occupies a part of Virgo's space. Apart from that, the autumn equinox point is located in Virgo. So, we are likely to find the corresponding symbols of a secondary horoscope nearby. Such symbols would often be placed on shifting bases. Thus, the snake under Leo could also stand for the autumn equinox point, located in the vicinity of the secondary horoscope. As a matter of fact, the actual autumn equinox point, despite being in Virgo, may have been considered covered by the neighboring figure of Leo due to the Virgo's figure being narrow. Especially bearing in mind that one would often find a second Virgo on Leo's tail. Thus, the figure of Leo could simultaneously serve the constellation of Leo and part of Virgo. Indeed, here we see that the plaque of the autumn equinox, the convoluted serpent figure in a frame, is located right over Leo, which has an extra Virgo holding onto its tail here. Morozov erroneously interpreted the snake beneath Leo as representing the Hydra constellation. He based his argument on the fact that the Hydra constellation lies beneath Leo in the sky. However, if that were the case, the snake in the zodiacs should also appear beneath Virgo's feet and under Cancer, which both border Leo. Yet none of this is seen in the Egyptian zodiacs. Most importantly, Egyptian artists also depicted the snake beneath figures located far from Hydra.